Thank you very much for coming for this part of the session. Continuing with our discussion of U.S. economic leadership, this panel is going to talk a little bit about how folks out there in the economy, the workers, the communities themselves, are affected by and how they actually regard the importance and the quality of American economic leadership at home and abroad. And are the priorities of the folks that we interact with here in Washington, are they the same priorities of folks on the ground out there making decisions for themselves, for their families, and when they go to the ballot box? And we have a terrific set of guests here to help us answer this question, starting from my, I won't go, there's details in your packet there about who our guests are, but starting right here on my right, Don Evans. He's been through many private and public sector roles, but right now he is CEO and president of the Pittsburgh Gateways Corporation and the Energy Innovation Center, right, Don? Carl Morales, vice president, Arizona Technology Council, and you're also, I believe, on the board of a community college, right, the Pima Community College. Correct. And Catherine Novelli, you were Assistant Secretary of State, I believe.
Undersecretary.
No, sorry, Undersecretary, excuse me. Oh my God, I just demoted you by accident. Undersecretary of State, and you are now President of Listening for America. So I'm going to start the question really big because obviously, look, I write about economics for a living, and there's really only one thing we've been writing about for the last few weeks, and that's tariffs and trade. Now, the irony, though, of course, is that you look at polls, and tariffs and trade are not the number one thing people are worried about. They're worried about things like cost of living and so forth, and tariffs and trade are way down on the list. And nonetheless, it is clear from what we've seen over the last few years that there's been a bipartisan move, more pronounced on the Republican side under President Trump, but on both sides, to move away from what we used to consider the ideals of liberalized trade to one that's much more sympathetic to protection and tariffs. I'd like to start with you, Catherine Ann, because of course you are in some sense at the heart of a lot of these issues in your role at State, and you continue to be in your role. What led to this drift, do you think, from those ideals? And from your interactions with workers and communities, how do they feel about the so-called rules-based international order and whether it works for them and whether they want it to change?
Well, thank you so much. I spent a lot of my career negotiating trade agreements when I was at the Trade Representative's office and then at the State Department. And after I left there, I started this listening tour, very similar to what is being done in an updated manner by Matt and his colleagues. And so I talked to 2,000 people around every region of the U.S. about these exact questions. And my conclusion from that was that, we asked people in focus groups, et cetera, how did they make decisions about buying things, for example? And people told us they wanted the cheapest thing and the best quality thing at the cheapest price. We asked people if they looked at where did the thing come from when they made their buying decisions, and almost everyone said no, that they were looking at quality and price as sort of their combination. There wasn't a whole lot of, at the time, there wasn't a whole lot of knowledge about how tariffs worked, what they meant, et cetera. I think there was, in keeping with what was found in the report, a concern about fairness. That was a huge concern. And I can tell you from the negotiating perspective and what we did inside the US government, and from my conversations with other government officials like Sweden, where there's a very strong support for open markets. And when I asked them, well, why is that? Why is that, whereas we're finding exactly what you suggested? And one of the things they said is that they had a whole of government approach to looking ahead at where were challenges going to be for the Swedish economy and how could they, as a whole of government, look at how to make sure that they were looking at where is their comparative advantage and trying to support that, not necessarily by industrial policy, but to sort of address that. And I think because we're so huge, I think we haven't really done that as well as we should. I think there has to be a partnership, and this was very clear from all the places we went, including Pittsburgh, including Greenville, South Carolina, et cetera, that where things work well is where there's a partnership between the local universities, community colleges, government, industry, and where you really are localizing things and looking at how do you grow that economy that way. And policy up here that can enable it, but it needs to be taking into account not just the benefits, but what are the costs. And I think that was not well done at the federal level at the time. And there was not a whole of government approach. There were negotiators over here convinced they were doing good and that the benefits would flow. But recognizing that not everybody was going to benefit, that piece of it wasn't integrated in a way that it should be. And I think we see the results of that now.
Carla, I want to turn to you next because you come from a border state. And many people, including yourself, have shared international heritage, right? And I understand from Matt, your report, that actually there are different attitudes about globalization when you go to a state like Arizona versus a sort of a Rust Belt state like Pennsylvania or Michigan. And tell me a little bit about what are the attitudes towards the globalization where you come from? Do the folks that you deal with in your communities, do they see it as an opportunity or a threat, a bit of both? And how do you see your role and the Technology Council's role as managing to leverage the best and tamp down the costs of the things people worry about?
Thank you so much for the question. And absolutely, as a border town in Arizona, we have a great relationship at the Tech Council with all of our community members. And one of the things that I want to make sure that I bring to the attention is that when we talked about the conversations that we were having, and actually Matthew in his report included it as well, it is very important for us to have those trade relationships with Mexico. They are our number one export and import partner. So it's incredibly important for us to have that relationship with them. And it is very, very important to the business community because, as Catherine mentioned, yes, cost and quality are two things that are being considered. And as business owners, the tariffs, the globalization, these are things that are going to impact the products and the cost of products, which will then subsequently impact the consumer, right? And so for us, it's incredibly important for us to have those great relationships with Mexico and Canada as our trading partners. Our communities are very, very well informed and very well connected and very vocal about how important it is to them as consumers and as business owners.
Dawn, I want to sort of ask more or less the same question to you because you, spend your time in a different part of the country, right, but dealing with a similar sort of group of workers and folks. Tell me a little bit about what you do in terms of helping people transition to future job opportunities and what your experience has been in terms of whether people sort of see the rest of the world as having been the cause of some of the economic hardship in their community.
Yep. I love when someone introduces a person from Pittsburgh as being part of the Rust Belt. That means you haven't been to Pittsburgh recently, but truly the legacy of Pittsburgh. We have a front row seat on the issues of unfair trade practices. And if you look at the legacy of steel and aluminum and the downstream manufacturing industries that really made Western Pennsylvania, we saw that those business decisions that resulted in the dismantling of our industry and the offshoring of our industry. And so when you start talking about an issue like tariffs to protect the aluminum industry and the steel industry specifically, that's all well and good if we can follow that money trail and we can see those excess collected tariff dollars returning to protect the industry that we say we want to protect. Right, and so Pittsburgh, I run a nonprofit. We're focused on economic development. We took a 200,000 square foot Connolly Trade School, the largest trade school in the country when it opened back in 1930s, and we brought it back as a workforce development engine for the community. And we've poured into that workforce development programs, business incubation. We generate over 900 entry-level jobs every year. And so we're very focused on what are the employer-specific needs and how can we fill those, right? We have low unemployment, but we have a very large sector of our population which is underemployed. And those are the people who are the voice. Those are the people who really want to see trade policy work for them to bring back the manufacturing base, those good-paying jobs, of the future.
A question I'd like to ask all of you is that obviously the president talks a lot about tariffs, calls it the most beautiful word in the English language. What's your experience? Does his tariff message resonate with the people that you deal with, and if so, why? Carla?
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. And almost to follow up on what Don just said, for us in Arizona, as you know, we are the tech hub of the nation when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing. Aerospace and defense depend a great deal on manufacturing, particularly in aluminum and steel. And so for us, those tariffs have a significant impact on those very important and critical industries in our region.
Positive or negative impact?
A negative impact, right? Because there's a higher cost. It's going to slow productivity depending on the negotiations. It's going to have significant impact, not just on the economy, but from the manufacturing perspective, but also from a workforce development perspective. It's going to require more training for or workforce because people are going to different jobs as those manufacturing jobs are not there because we don't have the steel that needs to be necessary for the industries, like I said, in aerospace and defense or in semiconductor manufacturing. And while our academia, the universities and our Pima Community College and our community colleges in the Phoenix area are doing a great job in providing that training with career tracks and specific trainings in those areas, again, the limitations of the products, the raw materials that we need are going to significantly impact the Arizona economy.
Can I just add a couple things, too? One of the things that became very clear when we were doing our listening sessions, we actually asked people, would they support tariffs, and people were concerned about rising prices. They were very concerned about that. And so they were not really thinking that that was a great thing for them. In the Midwest, where we were, in Ohio and Michigan, there was a great concern at the time when we were talking to people. There was this concern about what was going to happen to NAFTA, which became the USMCA, among those in the auto industry at every strata, including organized labor, about getting rid of that benefit that they saw, because they saw that there was an integration and they were very concerned about what that meant for their own competitiveness domestically as well as internationally.
Dawn, I want to come back to you for a moment because, as you correctly point out, Pittsburgh is the antithesis of a Rust Belt town now. It's like it's built its future on robotics, medical technology, and so on. And yet, culturally, a lot of the state still thinks of itself as, manufacturing, that's in the name of the football team, and so on. And in the last election campaign, that message resonated. We saw both former President Biden and President Trump appealing to that self-identified image. And so my question to you is, it's been at least a generation since the steel industry shrank significantly. Do the people that you deal with still identify closely with that part of their heritage and their economy? Does it still shape their attitude towards things like global trade and tariffs? Will it always be thus?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you think of, again, our building, the Connolly, built in 1930, the graduates of the Connolly ran the steel industry, ran industry of the 60s and 70s. They've moved on. Their children went off to college, came back, and really built the eds and meds of Pittsburgh. But I would say manufacturing is still very much part of the DNA, and there's still a lot of that infrastructure, still a lot of that kind of drive towards the manufacturing base. And why, the lived experience in Pittsburgh is those were good jobs, right? Those were high quality, life-sustaining jobs. The opportunity of the future, we've seen the pendulum swing back. There's more demand for the career and technical education pathways from our freshmen and sophomores in high school. In fact, the underserved schools don't have the capacity to meet the demand that the students are asking. They're looking for other pathways. But the manufacturing of the future needs to focus on, clean tech manufacturing. We're looking for more than the menial jobs. We're looking for the career pathways in industries that have resilience, have sustainability. Again, the history of the offshoring of industry is still very much scar tissue for the region. So we want to make sure that we get it right the next time. I think with respect to tariffs, and you touch on that, you know, I started life as a free trader, as an intern under Congressman Don Bonker, and but as I've grayed, I've really focused on tariffs in the absence of a strong industrial policy and that are not integrated with a strong and well-thought, well-crafted industrial policy are just price increases, right? And that's where there are concerns that tariffs that are not using those excess funds to support the industry that we need, just raise prices and you're taking those funds, moving them to tax breaks that don't trickle down. So I really think that the use of tariffs, it's an effective tool, it's a strategic tool for sure, but it needs to be used to actually protect the industries that it's targeting.
So I want to address this question of manufacturing because certainly, again, a place where the bipartisan consensus has moved is to be much more supportive of manufacturing in general. And it's almost like a normative as opposed to a quantitative sort of judgment. You'll often hear it said that the U.S. has lost its ability to make things, and this motivates efforts to reinvigorate the manufacturing base. And you'll often hear it said that manufacturing jobs are intrinsically superior to other types of jobs, that they provide non-college educated people with good paying work to raise a family in smaller communities. Among the communities and the folks that you deal with, is there a view that manufacturing is an intrinsically superior way to make a life and that we need to bring it back? Or is it the kind of thing they only think of in an abstract sense? Yes, but not for me, not for my kids. And what realistically can we promise those people who think that we should have more of those jobs back? Catherine Ann, can I start with you?
I think that's just such a great question. And you know, what's interesting is if you look at the U.S. economy, 80% is services. And and that surprised everybody we talked to. They just did not conceive of that. And when you talk to people about, well, what does that mean about services? They would say, oh, they think it means you're working at a minimum wage job at a box store or, you know, at a fast food place, and they are not thinking about services in a bigger way. Even though if you look statistically at what is the return and the wages of services industries, actually they're very high. And so I do think you're right that this sort of nostalgia, this view that manufacturing is a better way of life is absolutely there. And we found that everywhere we went, even if, you know, the facts aren't exactly that. So I think there is an issue of looking at, of course, countries have to make things, and no one's suggesting that, but developed economies also have a very high services component, and that has helped them grow as well. So I think, you know, one thing I would say, and the report also confirms this, is that people will approach this whole question as, we know this is really complicated and we don't understand all the pieces of it. So there's a lot of emotion there that is a valid emotion. And I think the question is, how do we have a conversation that takes that into account, but also takes into account how do people make the best living possible?
Carla.
And I think in Arizona, I appreciate that. I think in Arizona, what we are doing is being much more intentional in changing the narrative of what manufacturing is and what does it represent for our community. We are more focused on advanced manufacturing. When you're talking about manufacturing for us in Arizona, you're talking about optics and photonics. You're talking about aerospace and defense, healthcare, med tech. So for us, manufacturing has completely changed. So where we are looking at advanced manufacturing as a high quality, high paying job. And I want to add that high quality and high paying for us is very intentional again, and not just a job that helps you provide a living, but a thriving job that actually provides the intellectual stimulation, the work environment that fits your culture, your needs. the kind of job that allows you to provide for your family, not just immediately, but long-term, whether it's buying a house or investing in a business. So those jobs are paying those high-quality wages because they're being very intentional with, again, the three-legged stool that we call the partnership between academia, industry, and community, to having those conversations to make sure that the entire ecosystem really grows and expands and supports itself.
So Don, I want to talk to you about what maybe the employers are detecting. So for example, here's one of the paradoxes, is that like there is a desire in a lot of the communities to have these good jobs, but then we all hear employers constantly saying, can't find the workers, can't find the workers. There was a line, Matt, from the report that sort of struck me, and that this is not about manufacturing, but they said during a round table on a dairy farm in northern Wisconsin, one farmer pointing to the surrounding fields memorably said, you would have dead cows if you did not have immigrants, right? And the message was essentially, there is work out there that is working on farms, working in mines and in factories that is so brutally hard and does not pay great wages. It's very difficult to find American kids who want to do those jobs. What are you finding? And is it realistic to think, as we sometimes hear, that we're going to bring all those manufacturing jobs back when we can't even fill like slaughterhouse jobs? Those are manufacturing jobs. They have extremely high turnover because the pay is not great and the working conditions are really difficult. What are employers telling you, and how realistic is it that we can promise people that there are all these great, well-paying manufacturing jobs waiting for you if we just get tariffs right?
Yeah, and maybe answering that just slightly different approach. Sure. I want to applaud Matt and Allison for the work that they did. Their task was to go out and listen, and I think you listened well. And the report really is a starting point, I would say, to uncovering that lived experience that individuals outside the Beltway are actually feeling. And I especially appreciate the identification. Your mandate was to look at foreign trade and foreign aid and those issues. But what you uncovered were these, I think you called them domestic foundations, like the high cost of living and the housing crisis and our desire for those good manufacturing jobs, and the lack of funding to provide that workforce development infrastructure to get individuals who are working to put food on the table and don't have the resources and don't have the capability to pivot to another position. Those are the underlying conditions that people face on a day in, day out basis. And so I think there are jobs there. We have a very low unemployment rate, but the underemployed is a huge swath. And we have a huge swath of our population that's not in the labor pool because the cost of participating are higher than the benefits of participating, right? And one thing I know you pointed it out in the report, it could have taken up a whole page instead of a paragraph. But if we look at 60s to today, the CEO compensation was 20x in 1960. It's now 350x. Right? We have an underlying wealth and income disparity issue that is one of those lived experiences, right? It's the elephant in the room. It's the issue that needs to be addressed. Does the free market answer that? Does the free market fix that? I'm not so sure anymore, right? I think it takes good leadership. It takes good leadership of our government and good industrial policy to drive that.
Can I just add one thing there? I think it's really interesting when you look at cities that have faced huge international competition, Pittsburgh being one, Greenville, South Carolina, where the textiles industry just was fading away and was going to, or even Grand Rapids, Michigan, where they lost their furniture industry and other things, not really to trade, but to the South. And what is interesting is that in terms of leadership, that you saw leaders sort of come forward and say, okay, like what cards do we have here to play with, and how do we work together with industry, with bringing in new investment, with the community colleges and our universities, and politicians to create something that can thrive. And what you saw is that folks did that. And so you see just incredible benefit that people have today from that good leadership and that kind of vision and that bringing together those pieces of things. But you don't want that only in isolated places, and I think that is one of the big conundrums that happens. And I fully agree that, just sort of saying, okay, we're going to put on tariffs and we're going to just protect this does not allow for dynamic building on a going forward and a vision of, okay, what really is our comparative advantage and how do we build that? And at the same time that transition's taking place, how do we support people who are not benefiting from that transition? And to me, that's the problem, and it's not so simple. It's not sound bites, and that's why people don't grab onto it, and I'm really glad that Matt and his colleagues are.
Thanks. I'd like to start just with some questions now. We have some folks with microphones, so when you get the microphone, please state your name and affiliation. We'll start with you right here.
Thank you. Hi again. Roxy, great panel discussion. I guess my question is around workforce participation models, because I think that's evolving very rapidly. And I hear a lot of the things that you're saying from the listening sessions and some strategies that you're thinking through, but even if you take advanced manufacturing, for example, when I look at my constituents, many of them can't even conceptualize what that even looks like to work in an advanced manufacturing plant. Versus if you were to tour one or really go deep into one, there are a million innovative things that are happening that are so incredibly promising, and I look at it as an industry for the future. But so how do you think about these workforce participation models that now need to evolve to show people what's possible for their life? And hey, you might have been in the farming industry and you might have had these skill sets, but let me tell you how that's transferable to truly advanced manufacturing or 3D printing or robotics and things of that sort.
I love that you asked that question. I would love to answer that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'll say is when Matthew and Allison went over to Arizona, they met with our community college, and they met at our facility, at our advanced manufacturing facility. And I believe Matt mentioned it in the report. One of the things that we're doing is our academia is talking to middle school students. They're no longer talking to high school, they're talking to middle school students. We are working at the Tech Council with our 750 member companies in the science and technology field to bring in some of that knowledge base into junior high and high schools to do dual enrollment programs. So when we're talking about advanced manufacturing for the future, we're doing it now. We are talking right now in creating career track and very focused certificate programs to make sure that we have a ready and prepared workforce to be able to meet the demands of industry. So we're being very intentional in the way that we approach manufacturing.
Carla, are there opportunities for kids in high school to tour some of the plants going up around there so they can see,
Absolutely.
as you were
So
asking,
part
with
of
their own eyes what these jobs look like?
Absolutely. Part of the industry partnership and collaboration with community is middle school and high school students touring the facilities every so often. We have events that take place. For example, tomorrow, actually, that's why I'm going back in a few hours, we have a program called SheTech where we bring all of the young girls from the high schools all around Pima County to the facility in the Pima Community College with partnerships with the City of Tucson, with Pima County, with City of Phoenix, from different areas to talk about the jobs that are needed and the skills that you will need to be able to meet those demands.
I'd like to just add to that because I do think going after the middle school, early high school is the long game, right? We have to be doing that. But even with respect to those 20-year-olds and older, right, that are outside the labor pool or are underemployed today, you still have to provide that pathway to allow them to envision it. And one thing that we have a pre-apprenticeship program that readies people. It's called Intro to the Construction Trades. It serves the 16 trade unions that are in construction trades. And that's a 5-week wraparound, engaged pre-apprenticeship. It was rated the #1 in Pennsylvania just recently. And it really focuses on allowing those individuals to envision what it would be like to be a carpenter, right? And quite frankly, those pathways, we're working with underemployed or unemployed individuals, low-income individuals, and to allow them to picture that. What I would say is our unions have healthy workforce development structures. They're called apprentices, right? Apprenticeships. And so if we can just get people on the pathway to those apprenticeships, we've done a whole lot of good. The one problem that we have in the country, and I know Congress is looking at it, WIOA, the funding vehicle that funds many of those pre-apprenticeships and apprenticeships, is funded on the basis of unemployment rates. And so here in Western Pennsylvania, where we are growing and we have construction and the demand for good union jobs and people to fill those jobs is going up, the funding for workforce development is going down, right? Just by formula, which is the same as driving your car by looking through the rearview mirror instead of out the windshield, right? And so we have to fix things like that are systemic, that are really holding back the opportunities for all to move them into good careers, good family-sustaining jobs.
Patrick, can you wait for a microphone to come to you? Your name and affiliation, please. Yeah.
I was lucky in life to have been on the staff of the Senate Banking Committee for 15 years. I was general counsel. I remember Congressman Bunker quite well. Here's what I'm wondering. What we saw up there was a movement. Business Roundtable in 1980 said they have a responsibility to the stakeholder capitalism. They had a responsibility to their workers, their communities, their suppliers, their customers. And then at around 86 or so, they moved to say their responsibility is to shareholder primacy. Their responsibility is to enrich their shareholders. And then CEOs got paid by shares. So I went to China in 1981. I saw a poverty-stricken country. They developed a strategy, in my view, to incentivize our companies who were interested only in shareholder primacy, wrecking themselves. And that's when CEO compensation went from 25 to 300 times the average worker. So this was shareholder primacy capitalism. So they had incentives to get our guys to offshore all of that stuff. And that's why they wanted PNTR so dramatically, to lock our market open so that our companies would feel freer to offshore all those jobs to China. Now, we still have an appetite for manufactured goods. Our trade deficit in manufactured goods last year, $1.2 trillion. So we're losing a lot of manufactured goods, but we're not producing them. One last thing.
I just need a question.
A couple of years ago, the Business Roundtable moved back and said they're going to move back to stakeholder primacy capitalism. I haven't seen any sign of it yet. So I just think, do people think that that is a part of the problem that we have in our trade problem, running these massive and ongoing trade deficits?
Catherine Ann, since you helped negotiate some of our trade agreements, why don't you take that?
Well, one thing that was very clear when we were doing listening sessions was that every place we went, there was not support for corporate behavior. And it didn't matter. I mean, it didn't matter where you were. Because we talked to people in focus groups and in one-on-one conversations, and that was a theme that just ran through everything, that corporations were about greed and not about people, et cetera. So I think it is a very clear sentiment in the country that there is a huge issue here.
Thank you, Ken. Anybody else?
A question right here, please.
Talk to you later.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Paula Stern. I chaired the U.S. International Trade Commission, where I served from 78 to 87. And, of course, have continued in my trade work, particularly with President Clinton. Trade adjustment assistance is still in the law. There are provisions for tariffs to be put on within the law, not the way we are seeing it coming out of the White House. It was always considered, quote, burial insurance. And I believe that we have a system that we ought to go back to and fund. In Arizona, it is really the model for the country because it includes the tech and the fact that we are not a manufacturing nation as we used to think of it. And I am concerned that Congress has kind of given up on the law. And with regard to China, there was a provision, again, for only 5 years. I thought that was a mistake. It should have been much longer for when China joined the WTO, so that there would be this adjustment system. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we have the law. We do not have at the White House any indication at all that there is a worker-centered adjustment program.
Don, why don't you tackle that one? Because you were just talking a second ago about some of the structural flaws in how we approach retraining and so on. And certainly there's been a lot of criticism of TAA over the years that it's too narrowly drawn to actually serve the purpose.
Yeah, as far as the workforce training, I mean, a secret for workforce development programs, and it's not rocket science, is that you have to start with the employer and work your way backwards, right? You have to look at what are the skills that employer needs, what are the, and what's lacking then in our workforce development infrastructure to provide a pipeline of talent to those growth opportunities. It does start though with identifying what are you going to focus on? Who are those employers we need? I love the comment with respect to the way that we changed the carrots and sticks in the past, and we allowed for that offshoring. If we're going to bring back manufacturing and kind of a strong economic a domestic economy based on manufacturing, then we're going to have to be a lot more intentional and a lot more focused on doing that in a proper way, so that when we bring it back for all, and we bring the entire population along with us to achieve that benefit. And I think it means good intentionality, which means good leadership.
And if you could, in your answer, address the question, is an absence of federal resources or commitment part of the problem?
Yeah, yes, I think that, and all the people we talked to and all the states we went to, we met one person who had benefited from trade adjustment assistance.
Just one.
And that was a good thing. But the conclusion that we drew was that trade adjustment assistance didn't have enough funds, and it was way too narrowly focused, and that really you can't just focus on trade, that you have to focus more on what's the churn in the economy, and what are the jobs of tomorrow, regardless of whether they're impacted by trade, but change happens in any economy, and how are we setting up workers to be able to evolve? And that takes money and it takes funding, but it also, and this I think is the point was made this morning, the question is, do you need central control of that, or do you need to fund and let more local decisions be made about how those funds are used based on what's going on there? And that was a very clear message that we took away.
And if I could add also, I think it's important to recognize the systematic challenges and inequities when we're talking about the workforce and these adjustments. We have to talk about the limitations, whether it's in childcare and transportation, digital divide. There's just so many different aspects that are not being talked about that are going to significantly impact those opportunities for trade adjustments.
Agree.
Any questions from online? No? Okay, any other questions? Yes, there at the back, please.
Hi, Sam Dryman with Ripple. First, Carla, congrats on the Arizona win. Sweet 16. Great job
Thank you,
there.
I appreciate that.
Welcome.
Bear down.
I find it really interesting that we have a Pittsburgh representative, Arizona representative up here, because your two locations have kind of redefined manufacturing for your own places. With Pittsburgh, self-driving cars, autonomous vehicles have really helped explode the local area. Same thing with autonomous vehicles and the governor's policies, and as you mentioned, semiconductors. How are you each thinking about your own local advantages, whether it's talent, education, or real estate, land, to drive towards like new areas for manufacturing and or trade fields?
I think for us, we are very, very fortunate. I might be biased because I'm from Arizona, but we have the fortune of having 364 days of sun, which gives us solar power, which helps us promote clean energy. We have the perfect landscape to be able to support industries like aerospace. We have amazing research institutions that are focused on optics and photonics, which makes us leaders in the world for those areas. What we are doing is, again, really strengthening the collaboration to make sure that we continue to bring that benefit and that richness to Arizona without, of course, losing who we are, because we want to maintain the culture. You all know that we are known for our 5 Cs. Culture is one of those. And so for us, I think we're very fortunate to have pretty much everything aligned for us, and having that collaboration between our government and our community and our academia is really going to help us. But for us, thriving in manufacturing is obviously, as you all have seen in the news, recently announced Intel and TSMC investing in semiconductor manufacturing is really helping our state, and it's really going to help all of the southern region. My biggest concern is, again, and I don't want to continue the conversation in a negative way, but those tariffs are really going to impact us. Arizona, being a border town that focuses a great deal on trade with Mexico in either raw materials and auto industry or agriculture, those are the things that we're going to need to focus on right now.
Yeah, with respect to Western Pennsylvania, I think if you draw a rectangle around Western Pennsylvania, it really is a microcosm of a lot of the challenges and opportunities that the nation as a whole face, right? And I say that we're the swing side of a swing state until they change the Electoral College. We always will be, and we invite that spotlight on Western Pennsylvania because we believe if we solve issues like that wealth and income disparity, if we solve the energy transition, if we solve the onshoring of industry and manufacturing, if we show how to solve that in Western Pennsylvania, we can leverage that and scale that throughout the country. And we're convinced of that. I think we have a strong position. We have 2 top-tier educational college facilities. We are big in the eds and meds, big in the automated vehicles. When you think of the AI and data center boom, the facility I run is called the Energy Innovation Center, and most of this industry, data centers, are going to run on energy. So those are key topics. We're bullish on the opportunities, not just for Western Pennsylvania, but for the country. But we need the leadership. We need to loosen those reins and be intentional about choices that are made to make sure that we build the infrastructure and build the opportunities the right way for all people to get rid of that disparity.
It's 11 o'clock now, so I guess we should. How many more minutes should I? 15 more minutes? Okay, good. All right. Sorry, at the very, very back behind you. Yes, sorry. Yes, thank you.
Hi, Pamela Bates from the U.S. Department of State. I wanted to ask if you are seeing an impact on investment decisions in Pittsburgh and Arizona currently. And a second question would be, going forward, what policies would you want to see to encourage investment for the types of manufacturing that you would consider to be the growth industries for the future at the federal level? Thanks.
Yeah, so very specifically, under the past administration, the DOE was on a path to really seed capital money, grant money out into very specific energy-related investments that are needed to guide us into the future. Of that $400 million pool, I believe Pittsburgh took away about 100, or Western Pennsylvania took away about 100 million of that for two specific investments. Obviously, we'd like to see those funds come, and let's finish the job of bringing those, and those are in clean tech generators, clean tech generators, and amorphous metals, which are both critical to the grid modernization efforts that are going to be needed in this country, across the country, to make sure that we've got the grid infrastructure we need and modernized in the way to pick up DERs, to manage higher electrical loads as we electrify. So those are investments that we need to make, and they need to be very strategic as we were on path to do. Our hope is that once the dust settles here, we can get back to that and move those investments forward.
I actually want to tee off that question and ask specifically about the question of foreign investment, right? And I think this is a question, Matt, that you actually probe people's attitudes about, right? Because Americans have kind of an ambivalent attitude about foreign investment, right? Sometimes they see it as taking away jobs. Sometimes they see it as creating jobs. And the current president says we welcome foreign investment as long as you make it here, and if you don't, we'll tariff you. What is your experience talking with workers and communities about the role of foreign investment? Are some countries more welcome than others? Are certain types of investment more welcome than others? And what would your advice be to foreign companies that are thinking of coming here?
I would say for us in Arizona, I think in the last three, maybe 4 years, we have benefited greatly, probably more than any other state in the country with foreign investment. With the joining of TSMC to Arizona, that really significantly increased our foreign investment. I think that we have a great opportunity as well in the medtech area. In Southern Arizona, we're very fortunate because we have our world-renowned technical park that focuses a great deal on bringing semiconductor to Southern Arizona, but also clean tech, as Don just mentioned. For us, I think that we are really focused at the Arizona Technology Council. When you ask a question about policy, one of the things that we really want to support is clean energy initiatives, because clean energy has more to do than just solar panels and electric vehicles. It's more about creating a sustainable workforce, a sustainable economy that creates jobs, that creates opportunities, that creates growth for our economy. So for us, the trade, and we do see a lot of companies coming from all over the world in the area of optics and photonics, but for us, it's really gonna be for policy, clean tech, clean energy, and really advancing those opportunities for the Southern Arizona region of energy.
Carl, can I just ask you, there was some controversy, I know, in the TSMC situation where they brought many Taiwanese engineers over to do some of the initial work. Some local trade unions, I think, raised concerns about that. How did the community negotiate that particular tension?
I think that was a partnership conversation. Again, I always call it the three-legged stool, right? Because we talked about, do we have the prepared workforce? So and there's a point where the community colleges came in and started creating those certificate programs to be able to prepare the workforce to meet the demands of that industry. So that's one way that they had that conversation. To my knowledge, and don't quote me 100%, but it is my understanding that TSMC has now expanded, but because they have that prepared workforce now with us, and those individuals that originally came are no longer here. They've actually gone back. Because now we are prepared to be able to meet those demands.
And this goes to the point that I think several of you made, that you need a holistic, integrated approach of training, industrial policy, and it can't just be, or tariffs, it can't just be one of those things. Did you want to address that?
I was just going to also add that, and the report makes this distinction, and we found this as well, that greenfield investment was widely welcomed because it was seen as bringing new jobs where jobs didn't exist before. And we saw that all over the country where we went. There was no antipathy towards greenfield investment at all. There were questions about taking over something that existed and what would that mean. So I do think there's a distinction in attitude between those two things.
Yeah, and I would second that. The concept of foreign direct investment, I mean, in global equity markets, unless there is a very clear national security concern where this is the Chinese government buying into a critical asset, a critical industry that we need to protect for true national security issues, I think everybody understands that the federal government needs to step in and block that. But in the absence of that, it's like any other investor. If you're buying it just to close it, to take away our jobs, or are you buying it to invest in it and grow in this space? And so there we should have always asked those tougher questions of buyers as far as their intentions, as far as their covenants, as far as their promises to the community. And I think that's really the underlying theme that I see. And again, I think Matt and Allison did a great job really focusing on that lived experience. The reality of that is that when these communities ask, what's in it for me, when you're talking about international economic policy, when they ask the question, what's in it for me, the policymaker and the politician should be able to answer that question.
Sam, you have a question from the online audience?
We'll take our next question from Kyle Murphy.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the panel. Among the great value that's been derived from the conversations this morning is identifying what we get from these nationwide conversations with a variety of stakeholders about economic policy. And so I wonder what the panelists' views would be on how to expand and deepen those feedback loops going forward to ensure that economic and industrial policy is hearing not only from Washington and business leaders, but also from community members and workers all around the country.
Catherine, why don't you tackle that one, because that's kind of your stock and trade, right? Yeah.
I think it is critically important. I think it is something that not enough was done of. People inside the Beltway kind of heard from advisory committees that were also inside the Beltway, and I think getting out and doing more is hugely, hugely important, and I think it needs to go back and forth. So now there's all this listening, but then the question of, well, where do we go from here also needs to be discussed in the country, and not just people come back with this information and then make up something and fully bake it and then, don't really iterate as they go forward. And I think that you will find a lot more support for whatever decisions are made if people feel like they're involved and they're heard and their views are actually taken into account, and I think you'll end up with a much better result too.
Are there collaborative or conferencing technologies that have come along in the last 10, 15 years that can significantly expand the breadth of views you hear from and consolidate and aggregate what you hear?
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, think about, one thing the pandemic brought us was Zoom and, all of its competitors, and the ability to have those bigger conversations without having to physically, go everywhere. Although I will say, I think talking to people in person is also really important. And I think the difficulty is we're a really big country. We have a lot of diversity of views, and how one prioritizes being able to do this, that this is something that must be done, I think needs to be baked into decision-making, and heretofore has not been in anything but a more pro forma manner.
Matt?
Can I? Thanks. Can I abuse the host role here just to piggyback on Kyle's great question, because I was going to ask that, and I think Kathy's done a great job of answering this, but I was going to ask Don and Carla, what do you think we should do next? What would be the most useful thing for us to do to follow on, to dig more deeply into some of the substantive policy issues that we were looking at, industrial policy or workforce training or other things, noting that we're the Council on Foreign Relations, so we're not necessarily the right place to do deep research on workforce issues, for example. But it feels like it's important, and this conversation has brought this out, and it is linked to our international position. So while you're thinking of answering that, can I just say there are 7 other states, well, 6, I guess, because we had Governor Sununu, 6 other states not represented on stage, but I know they're listening because I've heard messages from Wisconsin and Oregon and other places. So I just wanted to say to all of them again, thank you for all they did to support us, and we're looking for your ideas as well of how to follow up on this to make it useful. But with that, if you're willing to indulge me, Don and Carla, what should we do next?
Yeah, I would say I love the fact that you mentioned the 3 that I was actually going to bring up. I think that trade, economic development, and workforce development are all synergies. They all work off of each other. You can't have one without the other. We talked today a lot about, whether there's enough people to do the jobs and what role does immigration play in that. I think that's where the border trade agreements, that's where the conversations about border trade play a big role in those discussions. But I think it's also important for us to have the necessary policies to have the prepared workforce that we need to meet the industry demands. And if we have those things, we will see economic development boost, and we will see a boost in our economy. I seriously think that is 3 areas where I think we should really focus on.
Yeah, I again, back to the listing and being heard, I think that's a critical element, and we need more of that. So as far as next steps, find those ways of listening more, bringing more feedback. But then it's also what you do with that feedback, right? We need leadership that leads in more than soundbite analyses and digs into issues. The amount of publicity that the foreign aid and the USAID budget got, yes, foreign aid is absolutely a strategic tool in the arsenal of our government, but it's also 1% of the budget, where most of America thinks it's 20 or 30% of the budget, right? That's because of miscommunication, right? And so, I think we need better leadership to focus on leading from the facts, leading from, addressing those lived experiences, and really leading for the benefit of all, as opposed to leading for the benefit of just certain interest groups.
I really appreciate that you said that, because I have to say, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize that we are very fortunate in our state, because within the same week we had Congressman Ciscomani, who is a Republican, advocating for initiatives in clean energy and supporting the state's growth and continuation of that. And within days, we also have Senator Kelly advocating for the removal of these tariffs that are significantly impacting the Arizona economy. So when you talk about listening and talking, it's also about doing, and it's also about our leaders, decision makers, to be able to go to Congress and support the initiatives that matter to their community. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention the work that our congressmen are doing to support the Arizona economy.
I think we're now out of time. This is a fascinating discussion. I'd like to thank Catherine, Carla, and Don for joining us today, and Matt for your support and for your report. And thank you, audience, for your questions.